God, please speak through me. Let my words be your words. I'm a member of Alcoholics Anonymous. My name is Brandon. Um, my home group is the Lost Chapters group of Alcoholics Anonymous. We are a online meeting that meets at 7 o'clock on Zoom on Sunday evenings, and we started off. The meeting started off by going through the back chapters of the book, the five chapters that encompass the 12th step, and then we have gone through the entire big book from the title page all the way to page 164, and now we are embarking our way through the 12 and 12, and we're having a little experience with it where we read a paragraph or two, and we pause and we ask questions, and we uh, have some considerations, and go from there. I have a sponsor. My sponsor has a sponsor. I sponsor people and they sponsor people. My sponsor also knows that he is my sponsor. We have a regular dialogue where we speak a minimum of twice a week, and he knows, I think, just about everything going on in my life, and vice versa. I also attend two other meetings that are, or three other meetings that are. One of them's an in-person meeting, another fellowship, and I attend three or two other online meetings related to my sponsorship family. So I'm also active in service. I assist in putting on a couple retreats, and I know that just having to maintain a meeting like this is a big deal. And I've got a ton of inventory that shows me that the selfishness and self-centeredness in me thinks that I'm a pretty big deal, and that everybody else is simply acting wrong when they don't acknowledge it. But I really want to acknowledge the fact that Stephen's making me feel like a really big deal, because I don't know that I've ever had anybody listen to me tell my story sitting in a hospital bed. So just the fact that he wanted to be here so bad and listen to me, it just makes me feel special and like I'm a really big deal. So I still sometimes get trapped in my own head and thinking that about myself. So my sobriety date is June 15th of 2011. That is not the day I picked. That is the day that I was struck sober. I had nothing to do with that date. It was picked for me, and I'll talk more about that, I believe. I also operating on about 2 hours of sleep and about 10 hours of driving, and maybe I'll talk about that too. I don't know. But I'm sufficiently caffeinated, so hopefully I can make this story sound coherent at this point. Um, I live in Waleska, Georgia. I'm in the where the mountains start in North Georgia, and about an hour outside Atlanta. I'm about an hour south of Chattanooga, and my town has a little four-way stop in it. All the meetings I attend are all the meetings I've attended for years in person have been anywhere from 30 minutes to an hour away from my home. I also have enjoyed the great eastern part of Tennessee. I attend the Appalachian Regional Roundup, so I'm glad to hear that people are doing well in that part of the world, and I pray for the people that are struggling in Western North Carolina and Eastern Tennessee. So with that, I will get started with my story. So start off with a little identification. I was born. Anybody else have that? Good. So at least we have that in common. Um, and I had a pretty normal upbringing. My parents are still married and have been married for I think they're closing in on 60 years of marriage. Normal middle class upbringing. No trauma, nothing significant. Played sports, did well in school, but I always had that kind of internal kind of thing going on where I didn't really ever really understand how everybody else was understanding how to do this life thing. And so I had developed this nice little chameleon um, way of doing things where I stood back just long enough to figure out which person you wanted me to be before I figured out who I was supposed to be. And after I figured out who I was supposed to be based on what you were telling me or indicating to me, then I would show up that way. I also had this wonderful curse given to me when I was younger. My mother said that nobody really knows who they are until they're 30 years old. That curse showed up at 30 years old when I didn't know who I was. And I was very concerned that I had somehow messed this thing up. Um, I did not, I was not an active drinker through high school years. When I saw my older brother drinking and having parties and having to clean things up. And it just seemed like a lot of hassle to me. So I had really not a whole lot of interest in it um, until I got to college. Once I got to college, um, from my very first drink to really my last drink, that there was one purpose to drinking, and that was just to get messed up, was to change the way that I felt so that I could be who I thought I was supposed to be and lower the inhibition just enough to where I didn't care as much what you thought about me and how I was acting and what I was doing. However, when I was drinking, I always wanted to make sure that I was as loud, if not louder than anybody else, laughing harder, making sure that everybody recognized the fact that I'm a pretty big deal. So big shotism kind of is part of my story and who I think I am and how I've showed up. Even showed up early in AA. I wouldn't show up to a meeting um, unless I was in a collared shirt and nice pants and everything because I thought if I looked right, then I was right. Um, and so I didn't really quite understand this thing until I had actually gotten into the steps and started working the steps. But I'm going to fast forward. I went through 8 jobs in 6 years, had a failed business bankruptcy, uh, and a lot of carnage. And I don't love to spend a bunch of time in the experience of drinking because for me, the greatest part of my life is the part of my life that I live today and the part that I'm excited about living from this point forward. So I like to get to that part of my story as fast as I can. And so there was this near the end of May in 2011, I had this wonderfully horrific experience where I no longer wanted to exist. And prior to this experience, I had pondered not existing before. Um, I had even kind of played around with the idea of how it would be done. And usually what ended up happening as I was pondering those things is at some point in time, I would start to realize that if I wasn't here to correct the story and how you told it, that you might get it wrong of what happened to me. Or I was worried about my kids, what would happen to them, and would the life insurance hold up and these sort of things. And this date, this date in late May of 2011, it was an evening where I didn't care about all those things anymore, and I got to the place where I just didn't want to exist. And so I stood outside the room where I kept my pistol, and there's a force field on the door. And I continued to go back to the beer fridge and grab additional tall boys and drink those with the intent of going in and shooting myself in the face. And for whatever reason, I know now why, but for whatever reason, that experience didn't happen. And what ended up happening is my wife was out with some of her friends, and I took the kids over to a neighbor's house and asked if they could spend the night. And then I drove an hour and a half north to my parents' place and tried to get into their house, and for some reason couldn't get into the house. Ended up making a little bed out of patio cushions and towels and passing out on my parents' back patio. And I don't know about you guys, I was not blessed with that wonderful thing called blacking out. From for my entire drinking career, I remembered everything that happened. Sometimes it was a little hazy, but I remembered everything I did, everything that happened while I was drinking. And then there was that morning where I would wake up and I would go through my pockets and see the receipts and things that happened, and I would just be like, no, 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 I didn't do that, did I? And and there was just that disgust. But even on those days when I would do that, I always had a story. I always had an angle. I always had a reason for why I was where I was, or why I was late, or why this happened, and so on and so forth. And always some sort of justification. And um, the next morning from me going up to my parents' place. I woke up with my dad bumping me with his foot, wondering what the hell I was doing on his back patio. And in that moment when I came to, I had the realization that I had made a huge mistake. And the mistake I had made was I didn't have a good reason for being there. So I asked him if he would go back inside so I could come up with the story of why I was passed out on his back patio. And this is the way I describe it, but this does not describe it. This is the way I always describe it. Is in that moment, the air was crisper, the birds were louder, and the sun was brighter, and the magnitude of what had happened the night before was thrust upon me. And I knew it had something to do with alcohol, and it scared, it really scared me, and so it sobered me up for 4 days. And 4 days later, I was back at it, doing the same thing that I always did. And within a couple of weeks from that experience, I was on an island with no bridge off the coast of South Carolina, where you have to schedule your way on and off the island. And in the middle of that week, on Wednesday, my wife announced to me and to her parents that she no longer wanted to be married to me. Now, this was a shock to me. It was a slight miscalculation. And in that moment, I lost house, wife, car, kids, everything that I thought was important. All of the things that I had accumulated in life that I was supposed to have because that's what a person at that point in time in their life has. And then I got to spend the next 4 days on that island with no bridge, listening to my mother-in-law and the mother of my children explain to me what was wrong with me. I like to say that it was a good start to a 6-step defect list, but I didn't even know what that was at the time. And at that point in time, I started developing Brandon's plan. I love listening to newcomers tell me about their plan. I love hearing all the things that they're going to do and how life's going to go and so on and so forth. And so, but this was Brandon's plan. And I think it was a pretty good plan. You guys can judge it yourself. Is I was going to return to work on Monday and make so much damn money that she was going to regret the day that she ever left me. It's a good plan, right? And so that that Sunday night we returned, or that Sunday we returned home, and I'm in the big room, and my wife's in the guest room, and I'm doing one of those weepy, snotty cries, the kind where you can't catch your breath, blowing snot bubbles out of my nose, and the dog won't even sleep in the room with me anymore, and she's down in the guest room, and I climb down next to the bed, I get on my knees, and I say probably the most perfect prayer I've ever said, which is, God, I don't know if you're real or not, but if you are, please just make it better. And a sense of peace and comfort comes over me, and I climb back up in bed and I fall asleep. And I wake up on Monday morning and I'm ready to go execute the plan. And so I return to work. I walk into my boss's office and I explain to her I'm rejuvenated and refreshed from this wonderful vacation. And she fires me. So here Brandon is, a complete failure at living, a complete failure at dying, with this mess of a life. And what happened is a little window of opportunity opened where I was willing to be surrendered. I was willing to become teachable. I was willing to consider that perhaps I had no idea how to live. I had no idea how to die. I had no idea how to exist. And so, as spirit would have it, I ended up running into a friend of mine that used to attend the same parties that I was going to. He lived in the neighborhood, and I asked him if he was still being good, if he was still not drinking, and he said he was still not drinking, and I asked him if he was going to meetings for that, and he said he was, and I asked him if he would take me to a meeting, and he said he would, and he said there's one today at noon, and I was like, oh, hold on, let's not be so hasty, like he said, well, there's one tomorrow at noon. In fact, there's one every day at noon except for Sunday. There's one Friday night, there's one Wednesday night. Now I negotiated the following Monday. It's a great negotiation. But before the meeting, I met with my friend and his sponsor and for dinner, and his sponsor slid a copy of the uh, the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous across the table to me. Now it's a third edition, and he said that I could borrow it, but that he would like it back, and that he would get me my own at the meeting. And I was, all I knew of AA was the fact that the things that I saw in movies, and there was one time where I was living in Texas where I had a particular evening where I had a party for myself, and the next day I was feeling pretty poorly, and my family was getting and I were getting ready to move to Texas, and so I had looked up AA meetings, and the closest AA meeting to where I was at this church that my family and I were thinking about joining, and well, I didn't want to go to that meeting because if I went to that meeting at that church that we're thinking about joining, then they might think I was an alcoholic, and I don't want to join a church and them thinking I'm an alcoholic. So that's the closest I had ever gotten to a meeting. And so we go to a meeting. The two ladies sitting at the front, Linda and Debbie, I think that they're the head of AA. And they're passing around this little sign-in sheet, or this little newcomers packet where they put their phone numbers on it. And I thought it was roll. I was supposed to sign in, and during that meeting, there's this guy named Bill that sat in the middle of the room, and he shared this. This is the only thing I remember from the meeting, other than the sign-in sheet, was he says, if you pray to God for direction, you better be willing to move your feet. And another little piece of information came, and I started to become a little more open to the possibility that maybe this power that I prayed to that one Sunday night, and that seems to be doing something in my life, is kind of leading me in a direction. And so I started interviewing sponsors. I had an idea of what I wanted out of a sponsor, and wanted them to attend the meetings that I attended. And I found this gentleman that had between 35 and 40 years and attended the meetings. And I asked him if he would sponsor me, and he said he would. And then we started kind of working our way through the steps. But at the time, I was listening to a ton of speaker tapes, and I was heavily influenced by this gentleman by Mark Houston, who had this one talk where he was talking about steps 10 and 11, and what he was talking about was this existence where you're kind of in a new realm. You're in the realm of the spirit, and it's new language that we can't use in any other way, because we've not experienced the things until we get to those steps. So I was very motivated to get to those steps. And this gentleman starts taking me through the steps, and there were some things that just weren't sounding right with me, and they weren't jiving. And so um, at about 90 days, I went to my first retreat, and there were these two twin brothers from Texas that were the facilitators of the retreat. One of them's got an eye patch, and they were up there at the front of the room, and they were presenting the steps of Alcoholics Anonymous out of the big book in a way that was nothing like I had heard in any of the meetings that I had been attending. And it really started opening my eyes to maybe what this literature says and some other things. And so I promptly got a new sponsor that attended that retreat, and he took me through the steps, and I had a spiritual experience, and I stayed sober. He didn't. And so I got very engaged in the fellowship at an early period of time where I started having these new experiences, and I started understanding that I couldn't do these things on my own. Um, and when I was about 5.5, 6 months sober, I had an experience where um, I'd always read the Ninth Step Promises. This is before I knew that the Ninth Step Promises were associated with actually working the Ninth Step. But there's a line in there that says, no matter how far down the scale we have gone, we will see how our experience can benefit others. And I didn't believe that. I didn't believe that all the garbage that I had been through, the bankruptcy and the 8 jobs in 6 years and the failed marriage and the 2 kids that I hardly got to see, the failed business and all those things. I didn't think that any of that stuff was worth sharing with anybody. I didn't think any of those things were worthwhile to anyone. But I had this experience where there's a gentleman that they were some friends of mine were doing a 12-step call on, and he had an opportunity to get into a sober living, but it wasn't until the following Monday, and it was a Saturday morning, and they needed a place for him to stay. At this point in time, I had just moved into my brand new 1 bedroom apartment after I had moved out of my parents' basement, and and I happened to be alone and have a weekend free, so I said I was available, and so I didn't really know how to do this 12-step call thing, and so called a bunch of people. I talked to a bunch of people. I read the chapter and did some things, and so I went and picked this guy up after the people that were doing the actual 12-step call, made sure that everything was safe, and I was going to take him on a marathon group of meetings, and so he gets in my car, and I start telling him my story. I start telling him about all that garbage that I thought that I had going on in my life, and all the failures and all those things, because that's all I had at that point in time. I hadn't really been sponsoring anybody. I was starting to make my amends. I had gotten interested in steps 10 and 11, but I really didn't know like what else to do. So I shared all that stuff that I thought was garbage, and I've been having this little love affair with these couple paragraphs on page 124, the Henry Ford paragraphs. It says Henry Ford once made a wise remark to the effect that experience is a thing of supreme value in life. That is true only if one is willing to turn the past into good account. We grow by our willingness to face and rectify errors and convert them into assets. The alcoholic's past thus becomes the principal asset of the family, and frequently it is almost the only one. This painful past may be of infinite value to other families still struggling with their problem. We think each family which has been relieved owes something to those who have not. And when the occasion requires, each member of it should be only too willing to bring former mistakes, no matter how grievous, out of their hiding places. Showing others who suffer how we were given help is the very thing which makes life seem so worthwhile to us now. Cling to the thought that in God's hands, the dark past is the greatest possession you have, the key to life and happiness for others. With it, you can avert death and misery for them. So I tell him this guy my story. And as I'm telling him my story, he's hunching lower and lower and lower into the front seat. I think he's getting ready to get sick in my car, but I'm making sure he's not going to. And I finished telling him my story, and then I said, "Now you tell me yours." And he says, "I don't have to. You just told it to me." So you see, he had the same garbage past. He had the failed business and the multiple jobs and the wife that kicked him out. Now I have a son and a daughter. He had 2 daughters that he hardly gets to see. And so in that moment, what happened is I realized, holy cow, all this stuff that I think is completely worthless is actually useful to somebody else. And in the 7th step prayer, it talks about, take away these things that stand in my way of my usefulness to you and my fellows. And so I started to pick up very early that the focus of what I'm supposed to be doing in existence is to become useful. Now, if you remember, I didn't want my life anymore. I was willing to put a gun in my mouth and shoot myself in the face. And so I don't really know if there's an alternate reality that can start when another reality ends or not, but it almost seems like the life that I live today versus the life that I had before almost do not exist in the same, they can't exist in the same body. It's almost like that night I did die and a new life started. And so what's happened in this new life where I've realized that the best I could do is ruin everything is that I started to trust and rely upon this other power, this power that's greater than me, spirit, the universe, whatever you want to call it. And things started happening. And slowly my life started improving. And when I was about 10 months sober, I held out for almost a year, like you guys suggested. Um, there might have been one relationship prior to that, but at 10 months sober, I fell in love with this smoking hot redhead that I'm married to now. And she was actually friends with the mother of my children, with the mother of my children. And so I was faced with this kind of weird predicament of she could verify anything I ever said with the mother of my children. And she probably needed to know all of the things about me because she was probably going to get told by the mother of my children about all the stuff I did. And so effectively, I don't recommend this, but this is how the universe kind of paints me into a corner, right? Paints me into a place where I have to be honest with somebody when I don't want to be honest with somebody. Because up to this point, any woman that I was ever with, I always tried to exaggerate, make myself sound bigger and better and more wonderful than I possibly was. And this woman who I started dating, I really, really liked her. And so effectively, what I did is I went through my entire four step. I didn't really do that, but I effectively did that. I told her about all the garbage of my life and all the things that had happened. And she stayed. It was the weirdest thing. I was honest and she stayed. And so what happened is eventually when the mother of my children found out we were dating, she let this woman know that I don't think you have any idea who you are dating. And the woman that I'm married to now said, no, let me be clear. I know exactly who I'm dating. And the man that you were married to is not the man that I am dating. You see, there's this transformative power. She didn't say this, but I'm going to add to it. There's this transformative power in the universe that is part of and flows through everything that took this broken man and started to make him useful, and started to transform him in ways that didn't seem possible. It was kind of this paradoxical existence. Um, Now, the reason why it's important for me to bring that up is that this past Saturday was our 10-year wedding anniversary. And so I like to brag about the fact that I've now been married to two women for 10 years. Other people just try to stay married to one woman, but I like to spread my love around. But there were a lot of things that happened as a result of the failure of that first marriage. There was a evening early on where for the better part of the first couple of years of conversations with the mother of my children, she struggled to have phone conversations with me where she didn't explain to me what was wrong with me, usually in very colorful language that I'll try to save you from. And there was one of these conversations that she had with me where she said, "Not only are you a terrible husband, you're a terrible father." And I've been sober for over a year, maybe longer at this point in time, and I knew that that was two separate statements. In the first statement of terrible husband, I've been taught to look at statements like that when somebody makes them. I've been taught to find out whether or not those statements are true. And so when she says you're a terrible husband, I thought about it and I was looking at it, I was like, so is that true or not? And I had to look at it from the standpoint of, well, she's the only woman that's ever been married to me. And when I was married to her, I wrecked the family finances. I partied all night. I did all sorts of things that husbands that are in a committed relationship and committed to a woman are not supposed to do. And so I can say that, like, since she's the only one I've been married to, that statement's probably a true statement. You're a terrible husband. I'm going to have to accept that as true. And I've also been taught if somebody says something about you and it's true and it bothers you, then all you have to do is change. And so the question became of, well, how can I fix that? How can I change? And the answer was at that time, she had no idea, no plan of reconciling with me. Is there was nothing I could do to fix being a terrible husband other than make amends. But if I ever got an opportunity to be a husband again, that I was going to be the best husband I could possibly be, and that I was going to strive for perfection and probably never achieve it, but at least strive for it. Now, the second statement of "you're a terrible father," if I look at when I was drinking, that was a true statement. Like I would drive drunk with the kids in the car, and I would leave them in the bathtub to go get another drink and do all sorts of things. So while drinking, terrible father, true statement. While sober, I mean, I was playing Candyland with the kids, and I don't know about you guys, but like Candyland is like the worst game ever. There's no strategy, and I can't demonstrate my dominance over you at any point in time during that game. It's simply a game of luck. And so, like, but I would graciously and lovingly play Candyland with my children. So that statement of "you're a terrible father," that simply just can't be true when sober. And so when I got around to making amends to the mother of my children, which I thought was a good idea because I was getting ready to ask that smoking hot redhead to be my wife, I thought I needed to clean up the past relationship if I was going to enter into a new relationship. And so I sat down with her and we had about a 45-minute conversation where she expressed to me I explained to her, I was a terrible husband. I never provided the security for you. I was never there for you. I spent a lot of time trying to date you and get you to fall in love with me. And then once we got married, I stopped trying. And I really just thought that because I brought home a paycheck that was sufficient for you to fall in love with me and want to be intimate with me every single night and all these other things. And so I've been taught to ask three questions when I make those amends. And the first question is, how did what I do, how did my actions make you feel? And over the course of that 45-minute conversation, as she was crying and she was expressing, the hurt that I had done to her, she pretty well covered that one. And then there was the next question. The next question is have I done anything else to you, any other harms to you that I'm unaware of? Now, I believe that she could have very easily pulled out Santa scroll and just started going down the list of all the things that I'd ever done to her. I was kind of fully expecting that, and that's part of the reason why I was afraid of making that amend. And she said no. She said, I think you covered it. And then the third and most important question is, how do I make things right with you? And the statement that she made when I asked that question was, stay sober for your kids. Now, I can tell you that when she told me stay sober for your kids, and when I saw her drive away after making that amends, I kind of did a little fist pump and I was like, that's awesome. I was planning on doing that anyways. So that's going to be a real easy amend to like accomplish. It wasn't until a couple of years ago, I was at the Appalachian Regional Roundup, and um, this lady named Amy from Kentucky, she's full of energy. She was talking about how she had a very similar amend to that. And she went home and she told her sponsor that, oh, they just want me to stay sober. And her sponsor said to her, so what are you doing to stay sober? She's like, what do you mean? And she's like, what are you doing to stay sober? And she's like, well, I'm sponsoring people, and I've got an 11-step practice and a 10-step practice, and I'm continuing to clean up and make amends and do these things and advancing my spiritual life and be available for service and all these other things. And as the speaker was telling that story, I was thinking to myself, oh, wait, I thought I was supposed to just stay sober. But really, what the mother of my children said was, you need to do all those things that you've been doing that got you to become a new person and continue those for the rest of your life. And all of a sudden it hit differently. And I had a different experience with just stay sober for your kids. So the group of the people that I harmed the most through my actions through drinking were my parents and the mother of my children. and I told you about that amend to the mother of my children, and now I'm going to tell you why I only had 2 hours of sleep last night. Is so 2 Thursdays ago, so well, rewind 2 years ago, my father and my mother were having a little party for themselves, and they're a little older, and um, my dad lost his balance and he fell and ended up breaking his neck, and it ended up being a partial kink in his spinal cord, and he lost feeling in his hands and his legs, and so it was a big deal. And that night that it happened was September 20th. That night that it happened, it appears that individually all of my family were having little parties for themselves at various places around the city. And my sister lives up the street from my parents, and so she came down to my parents and she called me and she said, "Dad's fallen, and you need to get over here." I live about 15 minutes away, and I made the drive in about 8 minutes, and safely. And I come in and like it's complete chaos. My brother-in-law, my sister, my mom, everybody's just completely schnockered, and nobody can really act right and act straight and be straight. And then my brother, he ends up having his daughter drive him because he's also having a party for himself. So he has to be driven to the hospital, and I get to spend that evening being present in the hospital for my family and be the sane and sound and rational one with spirit moving through them and having an experience where I know that everything's going to be all right no matter what happens. And then over the last 2 years, my mother has been the caregiver for my father. He's been able to regain some of his movement, and he's been able to stand, and he has the use of his left side fairly well. But 2 Thursdays ago, my mother also had to have a spinal surgery because of a bulging disc in her neck, and it was a rather routine surgery that she was having, but logistically, this created a lot of problems for the family because she's the primary caregiver to my father, and he needs to be driven to places and be taken care of. And so we kind of had to come together as a family and figure out how to make these adjustments and do these things. And um, the surgery went well, and after a day, she came home. But last Tuesday, what happened is she had a little bit of a fever, so we ended up taking her to the ER. They ended up admitting her to the hospital, and then her sodium levels had dropped and some other things had happened, and so she was kind of having some delusional episodes and starting to have these things. And so there was a continued kind of deterioration as they were trying to get her levels right. And because my sister had taken some time off work, she was focused on my dad, and I was trying to focus on my mom. And then on Friday, I had spent the day at the hospital, and I had gone home to take a break, and I got a call in the late evening uh, from my sister, and she said that they were putting my mom on a respirator, and this kind of just seemed like it wasn't part of the plan, right? And so I said, okay, well, I'm gonna head to the hospital, and so started heading to the hospital, and as I'm on the way to the hospital, my sister calls me again, and she says, "Mom's coded. She's in cardiac arrest." And this was information that did not fit in the plan. It did not fit in what was supposed to be happening. She went in for a fever, and now she's having cardiac arrest. And so my brother and I and my sister and brother-in-law and my wife are there at the hospital, and they said it was going to be about 30 minutes and then we could go back and see her, but 30 minutes turned into an hour and it started getting extended. And so, the thoughts started happening, the realization of maybe we're dealing with something significantly greater than what it is. So my son lives about an hour and a half away, and I asked him to come to the hospital. I asked my stepson, who lives 30 minutes away, to come to the hospital. And then I called the mother of my children, who was with my daughter, and asked if they would come to the hospital. And so here I am with my entire family and both of my wives and my kids. And we have no idea what's getting ready to happen. we ended up going back, and the good news is that everything was stabilized. But there was a period on Saturday where it was very touch and go, and we were unsure whether or not she was going to make it. And so then she came to recently, and we thought it would be best if somebody spent the night at the hospital with her, and that was last night. And so I was at the hospital, and it wasn't a great evening. I ended up getting woken up often, and got about 2 hours of sleep, and then I had to drive to Charlotte from Atlanta for work and returned. And so, um, but the point of the story is that through this, there was never a moment where I didn't trust that this power that has transformed my life didn't have it under control. And yesterday I was able to ask the mother of my children, who's also a nurse, if she could come to the hospital and if she could come and have some conversations with the doctors, and she gladly did that. And I don't know what world exists where you can have a 10-year marriage that a guy completely wrecks to where he's now in good standing with that woman, where she's willing to come to the hospital, have the experience, and be there for my family, even though it's no longer in by law her family. Um, and so, in the middle of all of this, I have my 10-year anniversary, and um, I sent my wife this text when I was at the hospital on Saturday. I said, 10 years ago, I married my best friend. You've been there the whole time. So for me to tell you what happened in the 10 years since would be redundant. We have grown as a couple, as people, and as spiritual seekers. Our love is the model of love others aim for. I love you. And the response I got was, with everything going on, I totally forgot what today actually was. Yet you remember. With everything going on, you are the best human I know and the best part of my life every day for the last 10 years. I don't know in what world that you can take the person that I was before June 15th, 2011, and have the life that I have today, unless there is some sort of power that runs through everything and everybody that we're all connected to, that has the ability to completely transform an alcoholic of my type into somebody that's useful. Thank you for listening.